I thought we would begin with the idea of the university in general, but quite specifically JNU, which Nehru had a vision for. So you've been in JNU, you've been associated with JNU from the beginning. Would you give us an idea of what this vision was?
The vision really wasn't so much the vision of Nehru, because remember that the university came into existence after he died. It was originally to be called Raisina University, which is the hill on which the Viceregal Lodge is built. And then somebody had the bright idea and said, why not name it after the first Prime Minister? So it was called Nehru University. The vision actually was a vision that was developing right through the 60s among academics and intellectuals in India. And the vision was one of, we are an independent country, we have an identity, what kind of society do we want to build? And so the university was going to be a university that would be a help in understanding both the identity of India and this kind of society we wanted. See? So when I joined at the end of 1970, there were, I think I was the third professor to join or something. We didn't really start functioning till 71, late in 71. And what we were told by the then Vice-Chancellor, who really was a man of quite a great vision now that I look back on it now, who was not an academic, but still. And he said, I want a university which is not a replica of any of the existing Indian universities. I want a university that is going to be tackling new ideas, exploring knowledge. And I want it to be interdisciplinary. So given that mandate, I remember, for example, in the History Center, there were 3 of us that sort of got it going, and then we recruited a few people. And by about 3 or 4 months down the line, we were about 10 of us. And we brainstormed day and night, thinking of new courses, of the kinds of courses that would help us in exploring Indian society.
And it meant that academics was not something disconnected from the rest of life.
Precisely. Academics was not disconnected. What we were doing had a context. It was not, if you were dealing with something as abstract as ancient Indian history as I was, I had to keep on telling myself, this is not something that existed out there. The past is not another country. The past is still with us. And what is it that we're doing with the past, and how are we relating it to the present? And this was a very major aspect. The other major aspect was that we were very conscious of the fact that since we were doing courses that were different, that our courses had to be extremely analytical. And so we began with one of the courses that we invented, which didn't exist in any university at that time, was historical method. And that course was really a course intended to explain to students that there is a method, that the social sciences have a method. History is not just a story. It's not a narrative that you read 6 books and you string the events together and say, then this happened and this happened, that happened. But there's an explanation all the time for why things happened, for why people became the kind of people they were and the kinds of roles that they played and so on. So the basics of social sciences, which is what is your evidence, how reliable is your evidence, what are the causal link-ups that you're making between your bits of evidence, what is this leading you to, is your eventual argument based on logic and reasoning. These were fundamental issues.
Romila, you've given us a very clear idea of the academic, scholarly, intellectual base of what a university project is. I want to ask you about the extension of this aspect. Surely a young person goes to college, goes to university to also learn not just about life in general, but about life as a citizen. And that is intimately tied up with the vision you have for how academics will be conducted. So I'm saying this because I want to talk about JNU's tradition almost of questioning, both within the classroom, within the context of academics, as well as within the context of society.
Yes, that was a very, very remarkable thing. It was remarkable both for me and I think the students that came to us, because we were all people who had taught in Delhi University, and I taught a bit in London University before that, where it was a case of the teacher came into the class, gave you whatever he or she wanted to, you took your notes and you went off, and that was it. And there was a little bit of reading. What we started doing, for example, was to say, I remember the first lecture I gave where I said that, you know, a lecture is not a monologue. It's a dialogue between you and me. I will say things that you may not understand very fully, or you may disagree with, in which case, please stop me and let's have a discussion. And for the first 3 weeks, there was deadpan, silence. I would go on talking, they would go on listening or taking notes and nothing. And then suddenly one day, one student raised her hand and said, I don't think I quite agree with that. Could you explain it? And we had a lovely discussion. And then after that, the nice thing about a lot of the JNU lectures was that they were really discussion lectures.
If I may go to the other side, would you say there's been a rather extraordinary antipathy among the right wing in general to the idea of an open university, the idea of education as we see it?
Well, I think this has many causes. Generally, I would say the right wing anywhere tends to be a little opposed to an open university. I think in India it's a very particular situation in this case, and that is that it's not just the right wing, it's religious extremism of a certain kind. And let's face it, that, you know, we've been through this process of, in trying to discover our identity and the kind of society we want, there were many people who were, you know, with us, and many people whom we were supporting and working with. And there were the others for whom the kind of society we wanted was anathema. I mean, groups like the Sangh Parivar didn't approve of the kinds of societies that we were talking about.
The RSS would be very unhappy with the inclusive
the RSS would be very unhappy. And this really goes back a little bit, I think, to the period of nationalism. That the anti-colonial nationalism was relatively secular. And I would underline the word relatively, because I think not everybody was a Nehru. A lot of the leaders were quietly, one way or the other, Hindu nationalists or Islamic nationalists, Muslim nationalists. But with the anti-colonial nationalism, you had the two, what some people call sub-nationalisms, and others refuse to call them nationalisms at all. You had the Hindu Mahasabha and the Muslim League. Now, the Muslim League went from strength to strength and finally ended up with getting Pakistan. So the teleology of their nationalism was met in the creation of Pakistan. The Hindu Mahasabha, which then became the RSS, was left with having to face a secular country. And the battle today, and I think the nationalism question has shifted somewhat, the battle today is between Hindu extremism and nationalism and other forms of extremism and nationalism based on religions versus what we like to think is a more secular nationalism. And that is where I think the battle is going on at the moment. And RSS and the BJP regard the JNU as a kind of, a fountainhead of free thinking, of the kind of society in which the Hindu citizen will not be the primary citizen. There will be equal citizenship for everybody and so on. And of course there is the whole swell of the lower caste and the Dalit movements and the tribal movements and feminist movements. All of that is coming along as well. So I think there's a certain kind of desperation on the part of those who thought that come independence we will have a Hindu Rashtra. That's not happening. And I see over the last 18 months or so a growing sense of frustration that this isn't happening. And I think this is part of the reason why there has been incident after incident. I mean, every week there is an incident of some kind which is producing protest and which is producing confrontation. We are a society that is really heavily into thick confrontations. We're not a harmonious society at the moment.
Thank you.